Welcome to this session on the future of Europe looking in the cross-border sphere, in the cross-border regions. I would even dare to say the essence of Europe, because those areas are where you can feel EU on a daily basis. It's also could be a political framework, but that was very much now treated in a very harmful way during the COVID thing, where all the borders suddenly got closed and you couldn't even go to a theater on the other side of the border, or you couldn't have your healthcare, or some of the other activities just closed down more or less in a blink of an eye. It stopped tourism, it stopped free movement of both people and goods, but I think it hit hardest the people that actually live in the regions. And if we think about that, 40% of the territory is cross-border regions in the EU, and 1/3 of all population in Europe lives in cross-border regions. I think there should be perhaps more attention put to those regions also when it comes to actions and when it comes to political decisions. And I think COVID has helped us see this much more clearly now. I think we can find a way beyond this, and our colleagues in the Committee of Regions have worked very much on this, and during last month, actually, they accepted and approved a resolution, and I'm happy to welcome our first contributor outside Turku now, and really outside Turku, Slaven Klobukar. Unfortunately, you were not giving the chance to travel to us here in Turku, but you are here digitally. Why do you think, as one of the architects behind this resolution, that we need to focus more on the cross-borders in Europe? The floor is yours, Slaven.
Thank you very much, Wolf. Well, it is precisely for the reasons that you just mentioned. There is just such a significant number of our citizens living in these regions, and unfortunately, they still face challenges in their daily lives. For the Committee of the Regions, cross-border cooperation has always been at the top of the agenda. Unfortunately, what we saw in beginning of 2020 and throughout these past 2 years is how much the cross-border cooperation saw a setback more than any time in past decades. We have again saw the families being split. We saw people not being able to reach the hospitals, and actually, what our analysis showed, that there were a lot of citizens directly affected by the crisis. And what crisis did is basically just emphasize the problems that cross-border citizens tend to have. So what we did is, in an aftermath of the first wave of the resolution, we have decided to work on the proposals for the future, but based on the experiences we already had before, but also the experiences we gathered throughout the pandemic. And what we have carried out a very extensive cross-border public consultation involving all the EU member states, as well as those that are not member states, as we in the Committee of the Regions also look out for the external border of the European Union. And we have, together with the European Commission, contracted several studies that showed the problems that the citizens had in border regions during the pandemic. So what happened is that when in March 2020, when the borders first closed, it was so sudden. It was done without consulting the regions, the border regions. And then we saw that certain hospitals even were threatened to close because the staff couldn't cross the border. Luckily, this was corrected quite quickly, as it became quite apparent very quickly that this was a big problem, and this did not happen in further lockdowns and closures of the borders. So there has been, I think, for all the citizens who live in border regions, the pandemic has actually also shown what Europe without borders is, because for the first time in many decades, we saw the borders closed and not being able to cross the border. And while there have been problems existing before or for the citizens, it was nothing alike that we saw in the past 2 years. So the Committee of the Regions has worked on adopting a resolution which will serve as a basis for the Committee of the Regions' contribution to the Future of Europe debate. And this resolution outlines a number of proposals in different policy fields of what we need to do to make Europe as border-free as possible. And besides the ones that are very technical and related to local and regional authorities, there are also those that really impact directly daily lives of the citizens, such as the resolution calls that in the future the borders are kept open as much as possible in case of similar EU-wide or regionalist crisis. What we saw also during the crisis is that at many borders of the European Union, the emergency services such as ambulances could not cross the border to help out the citizens because the legislation didn't allow it. This is something that we call in the resolution to never to happen again. But past the crisis, we also looked in other problems that were impacting citizens' lives, and that is the qualifications still are not necessarily recognized across the border. So if you live in a border region and want to get a job just across the border, number of questions arise, such as, is your diploma valid? The insurance as well, and similar things. And this is something that should be regulated once and for all. There are also more and more public services.
I think I will stop you here. We will come back with more ideas, measures, how we can treat this. But I want also to introduce the other panelists in the discussion. But thank you for setting the scene and picking up quite a few of the existing problems. I think that also were pretty much revealed by the pandemic. Alvina Alametsä, you are the newest member of parliament from the Finnish perspective. You came into the parliament after the Brexit took place, and you are one of the youngest actors in this sphere. When you listen to what Slaven said, you have your own vision on how you think Europe should function. Does it make sense what he's saying? Do we have problems?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Slavan, for a great introduction to the topic. Definitely. Well, as a Finnish person, of course, we have this situation also in the homeland with Tornio and Haaparanda in Sweden and Finland. And there are great issues, especially now in the COVID situation with this border, because people tend to live very synchronized lives. They even share a school in Tornio, and basically children and adults are moving and working across the border. And now this COVID situation has really made it difficult. And the big issue that also was mentioned in the introduction is that the people have not been heard sufficiently when making their restrictions, even though everyone understands the need for them. So I really hope that we can find solutions for this, and I think this is a question that touches the whole Europe. It's not only about freedom of movement across borders, but also how to arrange education, culture, working life, and so on, so that it can be easier across borders in these regions.
What would you say, Alexander Salo? You are a member of the European Youth Parliament here in Finland. Being part of the board, being 21, if I remember correctly, looking about Europe somewhere in the front, how would you like to develop Europe, especially in the border regions? What would you expect?
Well, I would say that especially as a young person, maybe one of the most important things that I see in my day-to-day life is education. And for example, going across borders for education can sometimes be like quite difficult, especially now with the pandemic and with how COVID has been affecting everything. I know personally a lot of people that have been stuck where they are just because they can't go to wherever they have their university courses, and it's been really problematic. And then it's a whole problem for integrating into a new society and for your learning and all that. And even if you can make it, then it might be quite expensive with all of the extra things that you have to buy and get all the extra tests and things like that. So I think that it may be possible, but quite inaccessible for students and especially young people.
So you see it more from an angle of an educational approach, perhaps then linked also to working life, so you could be able then to have your internship and so in a smooth way, but not only as, let's say, being a tourist and being able of traveling.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Petri Sarvamaa, you are the senior in this group, with already doing your third session in the European Parliament. Do you see cross borders being an important part of the discussion in the Parliament and in your group? And has there been any changes during these 3 periods you have been there?
Well, thank you, and thank you first of all for having me here. It's a pleasure. I'm going to be very honest and frank, which I always think is beneficial to all parties. As an answer to your question, it has not been like a central topic at any stage that I saw. Of course, I was never a member of Regi, the committee on regional affairs. So I know that the discussion is heavily concentrated there. I can maybe bring my budgetary experience in the European Union and in the Parliament more into this discussion, and also Libe experience as far as the Schengen, so on and so forth. But what I would like to say here in the beginning of this discussion is that I think that we should be very, very careful in setting the parameters for this discussion, because and I don't want to be a party spoiler, but as I'm looking into the background information coming from the Committee of Regions, it makes me smile a little bit, because as a budgetary guy, I'm really used to this spinning, that whoever is giving you the figures, they are always heavily, sometimes stretched to the limit of being credible, stretched, for example, if we set the parameters of this discussion to figures like 40% of land area in the European Union is cross-border region, and 30% of the population of the Union, it's 150 million people, is in the cross-border regions, then I think we already have a problem. And I'm not saying this that I'm a strong supporter of what Slaven is talking about. I want to see these things taken care of. I want to see them become more in the forefront of discussion. I understand that the issues that we are talking about and facing are actually very down to earth, everyday situations that the citizens are facing. And this, again, is something that is at the very core of the whole union. So we have to take this discussion very seriously, but what I'm trying to say here, and I will stop here, is that we have to know exactly what we are talking about. For example, the COVID exposed things in this, or issues in cross-border regions that were not there that much, and now all of a sudden they became a problem. I'm just wondering when the pandemic with the demise of the pandemic, will also many of these problems sort of like go to the back burner more, and they will not be. I'm being a little bit provocative, but in the union has so huge crises all the time. We are facing like existential crises in the union. So it's in a way understandable that the cross-border region issues were never really at the center of conversation, because in a way, looking inside the union and from inside the institutions, it's a bit of a first world problem, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, you could perhaps turn it around and say that, okay, I think you were very pragmatic. You said that it's everyday life. It's there where EU could be felt on daily basis, every hour, every day, every week. But still, if we just cut out the ERDF budget, which is something like 360 billion, something like that, around, I'm not totally convinced I remember it exactly. Out of that, for cross-border, special cross-border purposes, we have 8 billion.
Yeah, but that's
we put less than 2% of the cohesion money into the cross-border things.
Yeah.
And the rest is dealt by the capitals to fill their own national budgets. Is that the way we should work in EU?
No. I can be part of the party here and say that it's not the wisest way to do this. Absolutely, no.
Before giving to Alvina, I will take in Slaven again from Brussels and from the Committee of Regions. So what would you, let's say, pick 2-3 clear examples what you want to see working now when the pandemic is more or less dealt with, at least the emergency part of it, where we need to put the strength and resources and act into.
What our consultations show, besides the dealing with the health issues, and there is a clear interest in working more when it comes to healthcare. There's also a very big untapped market in a way when it comes to public services. We have seen several European cross-border regions testing the share of public services, and in that way looking to pool together the resources in order to provide the service for the whole region, whole cross-border region in a better way, instead of having two of the same services on both sides of the border, or on one of the sides of the border, nothing. We see now creations of the cross-border hospitals. There is already one at the Spanish French border that exists for a number of years. We are seeing developments of cross-border public transport, but also a number of different kind of services. And this is what the Committee of the Regions would like to see more in the future. More access to the citizens to these public services, and to have the local and regional authorities as well as national governments to look across the border and see if there could be any kind of partnerships created in the future, so just to better the lives of everyday citizens. And one thing that whatever study that is being done by us or the Commission, we always see that number one problem is often that people do not even think about what's happening across the border, and there is still lack of trust very often on many of the borders. So the Committee of the Regions would like to see a lot of more projects, small projects, micro projects, where the people that live in border regions would meet and exchange, and in that way kind of start thinking about possibilities, what that could bring in their personal life as well as in their professional lives. So these are some of the issues that we would like to see change in the future, as well as a better regulation for those workers that live in border regions, as well as students and pupils.
Thank you very much. You pointed out these kind of services on both sides of borders. When Alvina in the beginning talked about Tornio Haparanda, there, for example, the fire brigade, even if it's in Haparanda, a fire breaks out, then the Finnish unit is the first to go. And they have had some vice versa activities let's say, in the leisure or entertainment area. So they have a concert hall that works better in the other things. And I think also with the athletic sports arena, they also share these things. But now suddenly that also stopped because they couldn't use it. Not for the fire brigade. I think they managed to do that, but for these lighter activities. But then we could have another thing, which I don't think, and when Petri said that perhaps it can be solved and it was not a problem, we have a tram between Kelheim and Strasbourg on the German-French border. It took them 9.5 years to agree on a tram track that is 950 meters long, crossing the river. So I'm not so sure that the problems were not there before, and that tram is needed for the population in the area. Think about that, Petri. Alvina, please.
Yes, thank you. And I very much appreciate the critical kind of questions that Petri often poses for these situations. But I must say there that I believe that also I would be hesitant to call these situations first world problems, as you referred to, because they are often exactly about the possibility to go to a hospital in case of emergency, about the staff moving between these borders, and very basic things such as the schools. And in the Nordic countries now, when they made the study on the impacts of COVID pandemic in the cross-border regions, 82% of the inhabitants said that this had a severe effect in their life. And these were not first world problems because the most reported things were, for example, a fear of losing your job because it's at the other side of the border and it might be impossible to go there. So it's very much about also human rights, basic rights. And then also with EPP, I think you have this great thinking of financial and economic efficiency. So I think that also here, for example, the example of the tram route and other examples are actually very much beneficial for financial efficiency if we do a lot of cooperation cross-border. So I would really recommend investing in that.
Thank you very much. I like to also bring in, it's so easy now to step on COVID because it's here and now. But also during the last 5 to 8 years, it started out as an Interreg program between Germany, Holland and Germany on hospital bacteria. And it was funded because the Dutch people have managed to do this in a very efficient way, and there were huge problems on the German side. People living in the cross-border area could not, even if they in principle had some system that they could choose the doctor or the system on both sides of the borders, they didn't want to go because there was always the risk of the hospital bacteria the other way. So now that has been developed, and now they have found out the things. And surprisingly, yes, why had we a problem in Germany with hospital bacteria? Hand care, washing your hands, doing these kind of things, the same thing that now with COVID, but that has existed. But that Interreg activity have actually now extended to be on all cross-border regions around Holland. So this is also something that is, I think, our right to have the possibility to get treatment for these kind of things and have what I would say some of my colleagues are now in the Interreg world talking very much about functional areas, not so much about the border areas, but functional areas. How can we get that when you live in a region that you can get the services, whether it's labor or healthcare or transport or whatever? Give back to Petri now.
Yeah, I'll just continue my rambling, trying to make. I understand that what I started with is rather difficult to sort of like grasp. I try to take another route because very good, Alvina, what you said. This is exactly what we should do. We should spend our money efficiently. The Strasbourg-Kehl tramline example is a very good example. But what I'm trying to ask myself here maybe is, what is the right sort of like angle to this? What is the starting point? Now, and I'm afraid that because COVID and pandemic as such was a big help in bringing these issues to the forefront. But that's what I mean, that we have to be careful. Now that they are at the forefront, let's stick to sort of like, what can we do and what should be done? And as a budgetary guy, my first question is, can some of these problems be solved with money? Everyone wants to have more money from the European budget. And when, as a matter of fact, the Strasbourg-Kehl example is not about money. It's the wealthiest nations, the biggest superpowers of the European Union. It has nothing to do with money or budget, but it has a lot to do with different cultures of governance, and thereby a plethora of like a jungle of rules, and it's sort of like you come total collision with trying to, and I can imagine how the local authorities were trying to deal with this issue. It almost makes you laugh if it wasn't so, in a way, tragic. But this is what we are talking about, and this, I mean, any program that could alleviate and help in coming over these differences, I would be wholeheartedly willing to give resources for that. But not just like, that we must not think that we can sort of like solve these problems with money, because I don't think we can.
One could perhaps disagree in the sense, because if you would put a little more, let's say, of the cohesion money into helping the cross-border activities per se, you wouldn't need extra additional structures there. But you are right, there are legislation in both countries, or perhaps 3 or 4 or 5.
If I may, as far as the cohesion guys are allocating the money within themselves, I don't have any problem. They have last 7-year budget, they had 508 billion between 2014 and 2020 for cohesion policy. If you were referring to that, I guess, when you said, I think you said whatever. I think I heard you say EAFRD, which is actually agricultural, the second pillar of the CAP. But anyway, I mean, yes, they should spend the money wisely within inside those allocations.
Alexandra, as entering the political scene in this kind of sense, how do you emphasize this kind of discussion? Does it make sense to you at all?
Well, it did get a little technical for me, but I do think like efficiency in terms like fiscal efficiency is very important, of course. So it's always good to consider, what can be fixed with money, and can it be fixed efficiently with money, and what can we put it towards.
Both Alexandra and Alvina, you are sometimes in the group of people that you say you are brought up in a way where you have a global perspective. You have from the very early years moved around, traveled a lot, and these kind of things. Not like me being a Stone Age guy that went for the first time ever abroad when I was 15. What kind of a world, what kind of a Europe do you want to have? If I start with Alexandra and then Alvina.
Yeah, I think it's definitely very interesting because, I mean, like it's definitely something that you've taken for granted, and you could definitely tell, like once the world kind of shut down, it was very crazy to think that, I can't just like go somewhere else and kind of experience different cultures. So I do think that it has definitely shaped like my mindset in the world, and I'm sure that Alvina can agree. But I do think that Europe as a whole and the EU should strive to, be even more open and free, and because I think that it's at least shaped me very well so far. So I think that we could continue.
Alvina?
Yes, it's true. This has changed everything, and I got my second vaccine, and I feel very relieved. I would not have thought that it's such a nice feeling. But I think that about this COVID pandemic, for example, it's very, very important to think about the cohesion of Europe as a whole. This is the thing that I'm most worried about, probably. What I mean is that if people get this feeling that, okay, this open borders is not something permanent, it can be closed down in a second, which is something we of course had to do in this pandemic, but this can have a severe impact on how you experience yourself as a European. And you know, we have grown up in a world where you are European from the beginning, but of course some people don't have a strong feeling, some people do. But in a world like this, where for the young people the main benefits of EU concretely are the ability to travel, to study abroad, and when those are taken away, I'm quite worried how that will impact our European identity. And I really hope that we can solve these issues and actually put a lot more resources in these kind of things after the pandemic is slowing down, because this is what we need, a mental change and help for this continent to be prosperous in this sense.
Thank you for bringing up these very important issues. And when you say when the pandemic is fading away, today's news from Denmark is that the Danish government today decided that they will open up completely from the 10th of September. They say COVID is not longer a danger for the Danish society. So we are heading into something new, whatever that new then will be. I would like a little, before coming back to Slaven, to come to I know, Petri, your father once came from the other side of the eastern border. Into Finland in the beginning of last century, and we are so often talking about the cross-border relations, but from Finnish perspective, we need a functional cross-border also in the eastern side. So how much should we put forces on cross-border cooperation on EU's external borders?
Well, in the example of the Finnish-Russian border. Again, if I take this perspective of the European budget and having to deal with that, I think that would be something that would actually have added value more than many other third country border issues and cooperations. If we look at the EU borders. So this particular border would be beneficial. The problem always with the European budgeting is that because everyone is, and also the member states are really doing their best to sort of get back as much as they can from what they give. And so this zero-sum game will never be the most efficient way to do things. And so this makes it a little bit difficult. If you ask me, I think that the Finland-Russia border could be something that the EU should invest in programs a little bit more. I think it would be beneficial. I have to say, I cannot resist. You said my father. I like to think of my father's side family so that we are only one guy per 1 century. My grandfather was the 19th century. My father was sort of like the 20th century, and I'm hopefully whatever you think, Alexandra and Alvina, I'm the 21st century guy. This is my century.
Thank you very much for that part. Slaven, when reading your resolution, I can't resist the thinking that there are many suggestions that are demanding some sort of structures, like EGTC or putting more money into the European Territorial Cooperation, which already has a structure, so that is not so difficult, but EGTCs or other bodies. Do you think we can get functional cross-border regions through structures, or is it by changing attitudes?
Well, it would be really by changing attitude. The structures can be very useful, and the EGTC is one of the examples. Today we have around 80 of them, and actually there is the first one in Finland now being created with Sweden. But they're very useful, and you can look at them as agencies that implement these programs. But cross-border cooperation should be a lot wider than that. It should be a daily interaction between the citizens and businesses more than a structure. We don't think the Committee of the Regions is not of the opinion that we need EGTCs or structures to cover every part of the border, but they can be very useful, especially at those borders that have a very dynamic, very intensive cross-border cooperation between local and regional authorities. Because so far the EGTCs and Euro regions are really cooperation between local and regional authorities, universities, and public bodies. But what we really need is cooperation between the citizens.
Yeah, you are right. We got the first EGC in the Kvarken area between, let's say, Ostrobothnia and Västerbotten in Sweden from the beginning of this year, if I remember correctly. Do you think, Alvina, this makes a difference? Will we have more and better activities in that area because of the EGTC, or would it be there anyhow?
It will bring better outcomes and activities. But of course, this remains to be seen.
Are you a friend of EGTCs, Petri?
Yeah, all fine, yes, no problem.
You are not that well informed about them. Thank you. Okay. This was about the organizations. If we go back, Slaven, now to some concrete examples, why do you think, for example, Petri have several times said now that he is more from the budgetary point of view active, and one of the suggestions you have now in the paper, which is I think 12 pages or something like that, so it's quite extensive. You say that in the midterm review or something, you are asking, and the whole Europe through the Committee of Regions, because there are representatives from all member states, also from many regions, is saying that it should be a reshuffling to get more money into the Interreg family. How will you motivate that, and do you think that is really feasible to do?
Well, our long-standing policy has been that funding for Interreg was not sufficient, and that we were expecting a larger budget than we have. And actually, what we got for the next financing period in the Interreg is considerably lower than what we had before. So the hope of the Committee of the Regions is that we could find a way to during the reshuffle, if there will be one, that more money is funneled to the Interreg programs, as because of the COVID-19 crisis, we've seen that there's still quite a lot of work to be done. But one thing that Mr. Petri said is that a lot of cross-border problems are really not going to be solved by money. It needs to have a certain legal and administrative change, or there is a tool that the European Commission is proposing which would allow some kind of negotiations between local and regional authorities that would allow for, in a way, mirroring legal and administrative rules onto another country in order to speed up cross-border projects, especially when they're Interreg. So, especially if they are infrastructure projects. So we see a lot. Money can be, of course, very helpful, and there should be more money for Interreg, but we really need to tackle the legal and administrative obstacles.
Thank you. We are heading towards the end of this discussion, but at the end I would like to raise one which is crucial for movement, free movement, and that is, of course, the infrastructure when it comes to roads, railroads, perhaps mostly in that sense. And one that has been looked upon like a success, and that is also getting pretty extensive financial support from the EU now, is the 10T networks through the Connecting Europe facility. And that should build quite a lot of bridges also in the cross-border regions. From the budgetary point of view, Petri, is this a good policy?
Oh, absolutely. This is the 10T and the Connecting Europe facility. I have always been a very strong proponent. When I started my being an MEP, I was for the first 2.5 years I was a full member of the Trams committee as well, and so I had a lot to do with 10T, and then for example now the biggest single infrastructure project, which is the Rail Baltic, and the numbers are really convincing. I mean, like I said in the beginning, all numbers are always spinned, so we have to be always very critical in looking at them. But I think 10T has been really a major success story, and is much more important actually to the whole economy and the inner market functionality than unfortunately here in my own home member state. Very often the governments and the politicians are able to see.
Alvina, will you want to add on something on the?
Yes, well, absolutely. Building more railways and especially possibilities for movement with night trains and these kind of possibilities is very important, especially when we start opening up the European region again. And it's important for environment, climate change, also quite convenient for people. You know, it's very nice to go on a night train and wake up in a new city and no hustle in the airport. I would love that. 10T is not enough yet. I think we need a lot of more resources as well. For example, here in Finland, I would love that we would have the tunnel to Tallinn, but I don't want Chinese money on it, so I have an issue here of how to do that. And I think we have to build this even more ambitiously from now on.
A lot of even the national train companies, they closed down all the night trains before. So now they are at least Austria, Germany, I think Denmark and Sweden also opening up some of those again. But it's again, let's say, starting again after perhaps 10 or 15 years of complete silence in between.
Yes, absolutely. There has been now a lot more, investment on these, especially because of climate change, and I think that's a great point. Also, what we need would be like a possibility to buy, railway tickets, from Finland directly to Brussels, for example, with no hassle. Now it's too difficult to, we would need a mutual system for Europe so that you can just buy one ticket everywhere.
There are actually a lot of those experiments going on now in many cases where you can test these kind of things. But also then coming back to how stubborn we are, I can take an example from there is a common bus station in Haparanda-Tornio, which is mutual for both Sweden and Finland. But when you enter the bus station, you can't buy a ticket both to Sweden and Finland. Then you have to go to 2 different offices, which is something that is still something so deep in our soul and in our bones, so we can't see. We can build a building, but then the function is still.
Let's have more of the European Union. I think that would be a good idea.
So, last round, Slaven, do we have a possibility of a border-free or at least borderless Europe? Is that realistic?
I think so. I think what the crisis have shown, what we can lose, and we need to have citizens passionate about border-free free Europe. Some of us have experienced Europe with hard borders in our lives, and now pretty much all Europeans have experienced it as well. So I hope we can learn and appreciate what we had and what we can have again and work on it to have it even more smoother than it was before.
Thank you. Petri?
Yeah, maybe my final remark would be actually taking up on what Alvina suggested. I think it's a brilliant idea, and it's a very typical EU project that could be done. And if there is anything good about COVID, is that it pushed us all to figure out, how we can, like for example, the COVID pass that I have in my cell phone. It is reality, except in Finland, but I mean everywhere else in Europe it is. So it could be done. And another thing I would like to say is that whoever is the fastest in realizing and understanding that COVID was just one, like a blip, like a split second in our history, and who gets out the fastest is a winner. And we have to understand that we cannot be stuck in this phase, and the world is just waiting for us, and then Europe has to be the first to do these things.
Alexandra, can we have a border-free Europe? Should we have it?
I think definitely we should, and I think that just as Slaven was saying that, like, I think youth especially have learned through this pandemic that it's definitely something that we want to fight for and not just let go of. So I think that this is a reality and something that we should be fighting for.
Alvina, do you think you get support for this idea in your group and in the parliament?
Yes, definitely. I think so. And I hope so. And
she now already has the biggest party supporting it, so at least as far as I'm concerned. So
yes, we have to start cooperating on this. I will tell EPP that Petri has already said yes to this. So.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for good insights and visions. Thank you, Slaven, over there in Belgium. And thank you, Petri, Alexandra, and Alvina here in Turku, and also to the audience. This session was over now. See you again in some other constellations soon, and have a nice Friday and weekend. Thank you on my behalf. Bye.